Do you remember those hilarious things in the 1980s that had everyone doubled over in laughter? The silly fashions, quirky fads, and playful moments were part of daily life, bringing joy to kids, parents, and even grandparents alike. But if they made us all laugh together, why do they feel so far away now? Back in the 1980s, there was one rumor every kid knew and every parent dreaded. Pop rocks and soda would explode in your stomach. It was not just a whisper on the playground. It was treated like gospel truth in cafeterias and after-school hangouts. Everyone knew someone who swore their cousin's best friend's neighbor had died after drinking soda while eating Pop Rocks. The reality? No one ever did, but that did not stop the laughs from flowing. Kids would sit around daring each other, tearing open the crackling candy packet, pouring it into their mouths, and then chasing it down with a can of cola. The dramatic sound of fizz and pop was funny enough, but the real laughter came from the exaggerated reactions. Eyes widening, kids clutching their stomachs, pretending to explode right there on the spot. Parents shook their heads, teachers rolled their eyes, but for kids in the 1980s, it was a badge of courage. Survive the Pop Rocks challenge, and you earned bragging rights for the week. To this day, people still remember the way the rumor turned an ordinary snack into a comedy event. Looking back, it was not really the candy or the soda that made everyone laugh, but the pure joy of believing in a myth that felt so real and so dangerous when you were 9 years old. The 1980s fashion world had one mission: make shoulders look bigger than life itself. Shoulder pads were not just an accessory, they were a full-blown movement. Blazers, dresses, and even sweaters were stuffed with foam or plastic inserts that could have doubled as small pillows. For adults, it was supposed to be chic, powerful, and bold, but for everyone else, it was comedy gold. People joked that you could spot someone walking down the street and not know if they were headed to an office meeting or a football scrimmage. Kids loved raiding their parents' closets, sliding on jackets with giant shoulder pads and parading around like linebackers in business suits. The mirror reflected a strange mix of glamour and absurdity, and the giggles were unstoppable. Magazines of the time showcased models who looked like they had airplane wings attached to their arms. On television, soap opera stars strutted in outfits so wide they barely fit through doors. Even at high school dances, girls in puff-sleeved prom dresses looked like futuristic superheroes instead of teenagers. It became impossible not to laugh when you saw shoulder pads stacked on shoulder pads towering higher with each season. While some people swore by the look as the definition of 1980s sophistication, others just cracked jokes about needing extra room at the dinner table to fit all that fabric. Today, those photos bring back pure laughter, because nothing says 1980s quite like shoulders that could block traffic. When Reebok released pump sneakers in the late 1980s, the world of playground fashion shifted overnight. Suddenly, having regular shoes was not enough. You needed sneakers with an actual pump built right into the tongue. Every kid who owned a pair made sure everyone around them saw it. They would press the little orange basketball-shaped pump again and again, inflating their shoes with a self-satisfied grin. The funny part? The pump did not really make anyone jump higher or run faster, but kids swore it gave them an edge. Classrooms became makeshift comedy clubs as friends smacked their sneakers, showing off the hissing release of air like it was rocket fuel. Some even exaggerated their walk, strutting across the hallway as though the shoes transformed them into professional athletes. For the kids without pumps, it was just as funny to roll their eyes and laugh, muttering that the shoes were just expensive balloons. On basketball courts, it became a ritual. Pause the game, pump your shoes, then miss the next shot anyway. Parents groaned at the price tag, but the kids did not care. The sneakers were a status symbol, a toy, and a joke all at once. Looking back, the pump craze was less about performance and more about the pure silliness of watching kids obsess over shoes that squeaked like whoopee cushions every time they deflated them. Nothing captured the 1980s mall experience quite like glamour shots. Teens and families would dress up in oversized satin jackets, feather boas, and sequined tops, then sit for portraits under neon-colored lasers or pastel cloud backdrops. The poses were equally dramatic: chins tilted high, hands awkwardly placed under chins or leaning casually against props like fake columns. But even then, plenty of kids could not stop laughing at how ridiculous it all looked. Friends would tease each other about their serious model face while waiting for the photos to be developed. The result was always the same: framed portraits that looked like they belonged in a parody magazine. The hairstyles were sky-high, the outfits blindingly shiny, and the background so bizarre they almost looked like science fiction. Every awkward smile and overly dramatic pose became a reminder of how seriously people took themselves, while everyone else could not stop laughing. Owning a VHS player in the 1980s meant living with one universal problem: the dreaded tracking error. You would pop in your favorite tape, press play, and suddenly the screen would fill with wavy lines and distorted sound. Entire families gathered in the living room shouting directions at whoever was closest to the remote. "Go back!" "No, too far! Fix the tracking!" The lines would briefly clear, then reappear, and the cycle of yelling and laughing would start all over again. Kids found it hilarious to jiggle the tracking just to annoy their siblings, watching the picture dissolve into static like a magic trick. It was especially funny when someone's favorite scene appeared, only to vanish behind rolling waves of fuzz. The truth is, the technical frustration quickly turned into part of the comedy. Families still talk about those moments: the shouts, the exaggerated sighs, and the laughter that filled the room as everyone wrestled with a piece of technology that felt both advanced and impossibly flawed. The phrase, "fix the tracking," still carries the sound of laughter from living rooms across the 1980s. Few toys summed up 1980s playground chaos better than slap bracelets. They looked like harmless strips of colorful plastic, but with one quick flick against your wrist, they curled into a snug bracelet. The novelty was irresistible. Kids spent entire recess periods slapping them on wrists, arms, and sometimes even ankles, laughing at the sharp snap sound. The fun doubled when someone snuck up behind a friend and smacked a bracelet on their arm without warning. But of course, the laughter really erupted when things went wrong. Some bracelets snapped in half, exposing sharp metal edges, leaving kids waving their wrists dramatically like they had survived a war wound. Teachers confiscated them by the handful, rolling their eyes at yet another silly fad. Parents complained that they were cheap junk, while kids defended them as essential fashion. The wild colors and neon patterns made every bracelet feel like a badge of coolness. But truthfully, they were just as much about comedy as style. The exaggerated sound, the sting on your wrist, and the surprise factor never got old. Even decades later, the memory of kids running around with wrists covered in slap bracelets sparks laughter. They may not have lasted long before getting banned in classrooms, but while they were around, they created some of the funniest moments of the 1980s. Sticker collections were serious business in the 1980s, but nothing topped scratch and sniff. These magical little squares promised to bring your favorite scents to life. Kids traded them, hoarded them, and stuck them everywhere, from notebooks to bedroom doors. But the real fun came when you actually scratched one. A sticker labeled grape might smell closer to cough syrup, while pizza carried a bizarre mix of cheese and cardboard. The reactions were priceless. Noses wrinkled, eyes widened, and laughter filled classrooms. Kids passed stickers around like they were rare treasures, daring friends to sniff the weirdest ones. Sometimes the scents were spot on, like strawberry or bubblegum, but other times they were so awful they became inside jokes. The phrase, "smell this one," almost always led to laughter as someone got stuck with a sticker that reeked. Teachers often regretted handing them out as rewards because within seconds the entire class was giggling and distracted. Collectors filled sticker albums with pride, but really it was the absurdity of the scents that made them memorable. Looking back, scratch and sniff stickers were not just about collecting. They were about laughing with friends over how something so simple could be so strange. Even today, the memory of scratching a sticker and getting hit with an unexpected blast of fake pepperoni pizza still makes people grin. Plastic jelly shoes were the perfect example of fashion gone funny. Kids begged their parents for them, dazzled by the glittery colors and translucent plastic that sparkled in the sun. But once you put them on, the comedy began. They squeaked with every step, echoing across hallways and playgrounds like rubber ducks. After a hot day, they left your feet sweaty, slippery, and smelling like an old tire. And then there were the imprints, the odd grid patterns pressed into your skin that made your feet look like waffle irons. Despite all that, jelly shoes became a full-blown craze. Girls wore them to school, to the mall, and even to church, laughing together about the squeaky sounds as they shuffled through crowds. Boys teased them endlessly, but some secretly wore them too, because the fad was impossible to resist. Parents complained they fell apart after a few weeks, but that only added to the hilarity. Watching the straps snap mid-walk or seeing someone slide across a tile floor in jelly shoes was enough to spark howls of laughter. Looking back, the shoes were less about style and more about the collective memory of their quirks. They were impractical, uncomfortable, and unforgettable. And for kids in the 1980s, that combination was comedy at its finest. Step into a teenager's bedroom in the 1980s, and you would immediately know who their favorite heartthrob was. Every inch of wall space was plastered with posters torn out of teen magazines like Tiger Beat or Bop. From the ceiling to the floor, smiling faces of boy band singers and television actors stared down with perfectly styled hair and dazzling grins. At the time, it was the ultimate expression of devotion. But to anyone else, it was hilarious. Parents chuckled at the walls of teenage shrines, joking that it looked like the bedroom belonged to a fan club president. Friends teased each other about their husbands or future boyfriends, pointing at the posters with exaggerated swoons. Even the stars themselves later admitted they could not believe how seriously kids took it. What made it funnier was how quickly allegiances changed. One month a kid would declare their undying love for one actor, only to cover his poster with someone new the next. Bedrooms became living, laughing evidence of fickle teenage crushes. The posters might have been meant as decoration, but they really turned into comedy gold whenever friends gathered to point, squeal, and giggle over the faces covering every inch of the walls. Today, flipping through an old magazine or spotting one of those posters online brings back all the laughter of those teenage obsessions that once felt so serious and now feel wonderfully over the top. Before smartphones, before streaming, and before social media, kids at 1980s sleepovers had one guaranteed source of entertainment: Mad Libs. The little paperback books filled with blank spaces became instant comedy machines. Friends would shout out random nouns, verbs, and adjectives without knowing how they would fit into the story. Once the blanks were filled, someone read the story aloud, and the room erupted in laughter. What started as a serious tale could quickly devolve into nonsense about dancing llamas at the grocery store or teachers eating pizza in the bathtub. The sillier the words, the louder the laughter. Kids rolled on the floor holding their stomachs, wiping away tears from the ridiculous combinations. Parents peeking in from the hallway shook their heads, wondering what could possibly be so funny about words on a page. But the secret was the way Mad Libs turned language itself into a playground. Every game felt new, every story unpredictable, and every punchline a shared joke that bonded friends. At school the next week, kids retold their funniest Mad Libs moments, still giggling as they repeated lines that made no sense at all. The game was cheap, simple, and endlessly entertaining. Looking back, it was not just the stories that made sleepovers fun, it was the sound of hysterical laughter echoing late into the night as kids discovered just how funny words could be when no one followed the rules. In the 1980s, windbreakers were more than just jackets. They were comedy on legs. Bright neon colors, wild zigzag patterns, and the unmistakable swoosh, swoosh, swoosh sound with every step made them impossible to ignore. Walking down a school hallway, you could hear someone coming before you ever saw them, and the sound was enough to spark giggles across the room. Kids exaggerated the noise on purpose, dragging their arms or rubbing the fabric together to make it sound like a drum roll. Teachers often sighed when a class clown strutted in wearing one, because the swooshing drowned out the lecture. But for kids, that was the fun. Everyone knew the louder the swoosh, the cooler or sillier you looked. Friends would joke that someone could start a band just by walking back and forth in their Windbreaker. And of course, the more outrageous the color combination, the more laughter it caused. Neon green paired with hot pink or electric blue, instant comedy. Looking back, windbreakers were not just clothing. They were walking punchlines. The sound, the colors, and the over-the-top style made them unforgettable. Today, pulling one out of an old closet still brings smiles because the swoosh carries the echo of laughter from every hallway of the 1980s. Breakfast in the 1980s was often less about the cereal and more about the prize buried inside the box. Kids would shake the box, pour out way too much into their bowls, and even sneak their hands inside trying to fish out the toy before anyone else. The anticipation was everything, but the reality almost always ended in laughter. Sometimes the prize was a flimsy cardboard mask, other times a tiny plastic figurine that broke the moment you touched it. The disappointment turned into comedy as siblings compared who got the worst toy. Parents grumbled about kids wasting cereal just to get to the bottom, but kids only cared about bragging rights at school. Show and tell often included these cereal treasures, with friends laughing at how silly the toys were compared to the commercials that promised so much more. Some kids even collected them, proudly showing off drawers full of cheap rings, stickers, and little puzzles no one could actually solve. Looking back, the real prize was the laughter, the thrill of digging for something that never lived up to the hype, and the joy of turning breakfast into an adventure. Even now, the memory of fishing through a box of sugary cereal just to find a toy that barely lasted a day makes people chuckle. Arcades in the 1980s were cathedrals of flashing lights, booming sounds, and endless competition. Getting a high score was not just about pride, it was about stamping your initials at the top of the screen for everyone to see. But while some kids typed in their real initials, others had only one mission: make the scoreboard hilarious. Suddenly, games were filled with three-letter words that made everyone laugh out loud. Some went with silly phrases, others with jokes that made parents frown but sent kids into hysterics. Groups of friends would crowd around the machine, giggling as the new champion's name flashed across the screen in glowing letters. Sometimes the joke was even funnier when strangers walked by, shook their heads, and muttered about kids these days. The games themselves were thrilling, but the laughter always erupted at the scoreboard. Kids tried to outdo each other, competing less for the score and more for who could write the funniest set of initials before the timer ran out. Years later, people remember those arcade cabinets not just for Pac-Man or Galaga, but for the endless parade of silly names that made the games feel alive. The initials might have faded with time, but the laughter has never left. Television in the 1980s overflowed with cereal commercials that made sugary breakfasts look like epic battles. Animated mascots like rabbits, tigers, and leprechauns turned cereal into treasure worth chasing across mountains, oceans, and even outer space. The stories were dramatic, but to kids watching on Saturday mornings, they were downright hilarious. Characters fought tooth and nail over cereal, only to be outsmarted every single time by a group of smiling kids. The rabbit never got the tricks, the leprechaun never escaped with his lucky charms, and the tiger's pep talks were so over the top they made kids laugh before pouring milk into their bowls. Even the catchphrases became running jokes. Kids mimicked the voices at school, giggling through lunch as they repeated the lines. Parents rolled their eyes at how much effort went into advertising sugar, but kids just loved the absurdity. Who knew breakfast could spark such drama? Looking back, those commercials were half adventure, half comedy show, and all entertainment. No one remembers the cereal quite as clearly as they remember laughing at the mascots scrambling, tripping, and failing in the most cartoonish ways possible. Breakfast might have been the most important meal of the day, but in the 1980s it was also the funniest. Every kid in the 1980s had a plastic lunchbox, and most of them featured the face of a cartoon character smiling brightly from the lid. Opening the lunchbox at school was like revealing your personality. Were you more of a He-Man kid, a Smurfs fan, or maybe a Transformers devotee? But no matter the character, lunchboxes had a way of making everyone laugh. Handles cracked after a few weeks, thermos lids leaked juice all over sandwiches, and the cartoon faces looked more ridiculous as they faded with age. Kids teased each other about whose lunchbox was coolest or lamest, sparking lighthearted debates across cafeteria tables. The thermos cups were particularly funny, tiny plastic mugs that were supposed to look classy but usually ended up spilling milk all over the table. Some kids even used their lunchboxes as drums, banging on them while waiting for the lunch bell to ring, filling classrooms with laughter. Parents grumbled about having to replace broken lunchboxes every year, but kids secretly loved upgrading to the newest cartoon craze. Looking back, the real fun was not in the food inside, but in the jokes those boxes inspired. They turned every lunch period into a comedy show, starring cracked handles, silly designs, and endless giggles. Few products captured the oddball humor of the 1980s like Chia Pets. The commercials were everywhere, showing clay sheep, rams, and even busts of famous people magically sprouting green sprouts after a few days. The jingle, Chia, was unforgettable, and kids repeated it until parents begged them to stop. The idea of a clay animal growing hair from chia seeds was just strange enough to be funny. Friends who owned them often treated their chia pets like pets in training, proudly showing off patches of uneven growth that looked more like a bad haircut than a lush garden. Classmates laughed when someone brought one in for show and tell, pointing at bald spots or overgrown tufts. Even adults could not help but chuckle at the absurdity of giving a clay figurine a full head of sprouts. The commercials promised beauty and fun, but the reality was usually a lopsided mess sitting on a windowsill. Still, the charm of Chia Pets was undeniable. They were cheap, easy gifts, and they kept households entertained as everyone waited to see just how ridiculous the hair would turn out. Today, Chia Pets remain one of those unforgettable symbols of 1980s humor, a product that was never taken too seriously and always made people laugh. The 1980s introduced the world to the Ghetto blaster, massive portable stereos that could play cassette tapes at earth-shaking volume. But the real statement was not just owning one, it was carrying it on your shoulder through the neighborhood. Kids and teens strutted down sidewalks blasting the latest hits, trying to look as cool as possible. But for everyone else, it was often comedy gold. The stereos were so big and heavy they looked like pieces of furniture strapped to a shoulder. Friends laughed watching each other wobble under the weight, pretending not to struggle. And when the music skipped after a bumpy step, the cool factor dissolved into giggles. Parents shook their heads at the noise, but kids loved the spectacle. Crowds would gather at parks as the booming speakers turned a simple hangout into a mini block party. The mix of confidence, music, and sheer absurdity made Ghetto blasters unforgettable. Looking back, they were half fashion accessory, half workout equipment. Carrying one might have made you feel like a superstar, but it also made you the punchline of countless sidewalk jokes. And that was exactly why people loved them. The Pogo ball was one of the strangest toys of the 1980s, a rubber ball wedged between two plastic discs that kids stood on and bounced around like human kangaroos. At first glance, it looked like the future of fun. But the reality? Pure comedy. Kids wobbled, tipped, and fell almost immediately, laughing as they tumbled onto the grass. The toy was supposed to build balance and coordination, but for most kids, it just created chaos. Siblings dared each other to last more than 10 seconds without falling, and entire afternoons were spent seeing who could bounce the funniest. Parents sighed at scraped knees and broken toys, but they laughed too when the inevitable spills happened. The Pogo ball craze swept playgrounds, leaving a trail of laughter in its wake. Even the commercials showing perfectly balanced kids bouncing with ease became jokes because no one in real life looked that graceful. Looking back, Pogo balls were less about skill and more about the hilarity of trying and failing to master them. Every fall, every stumble, every laugh made them one of the funniest fads of the decade. Every 1980s kid wanted a Slinky after watching commercials where the toy glided effortlessly downstairs like it was alive. But when kids tried it at home, the results were far less magical. The Slinky usually managed a few graceful flips before collapsing into a tangled mess halfway down. The disappointment quickly turned into laughter. Friends would take turns, convinced they were holding it wrong, only to watch the same sad flop again and again. Some kids even resorted to pushing it step by step, which made it look more like a confused worm than a toy. The funniest moments came when the Slinky got hopelessly knotted, leading to exaggerated groans and howls of laughter. Parents remembered having the same problem decades earlier and shook their heads at how easily kids fell for the same trick. The commercials may have promised perfection, but the real fun was in the failure. Watching a Slinky flop down the stairs became a shared joke, proof that sometimes toys were funniest when they did not work at all. Velcro wallets were a staple accessory in the 1980s, especially for kids who wanted to feel grown up without the hassle of real leather. They came in bright colors, covered in logos, and most importantly, sealed with a strip of loud Velcro. The sound of ripping one open was unmistakable. In quiet classrooms or movie theaters, it echoed like thunder. Kids quickly realized how funny it was to time the rip for maximum effect. Teachers glared as the noise cut through silence, while classmates stifled laughter behind their desks. The ripping became a running joke, with kids opening and closing their wallets repeatedly just to get a laugh. Parents groaned at how quickly the Velcro wore out, but kids only cared about the comedy. The louder the rip, the better. Even losing a few dollars inside did not matter, because the wallet itself was entertainment. Looking back, Velcro wallets were not just practical. They were props in a decade-long comedy routine. The ripping sound still sparks nostalgia and laughter, reminding everyone of how something so small could create so many shared jokes. In the 1980s, choose-your-own-adventure books were the ultimate blend of reading and comedy. Kids felt powerful flipping to page 27 or 54, convinced their bold choice would lead to treasure or victory. But more often than not, it ended in disaster on page 3. Suddenly, your brave hero fell into a pit, got eaten by aliens, or was zapped into oblivion. Friends passed the books around at sleepovers, daring each other to make the right choice, only to laugh when the story ended in the most ridiculous way possible. Some kids even made a game out of trying to find every single bad ending just for the comedy. Teachers praised the books for getting kids to read more, but students knew the real joy was laughing together at how fast the adventure could go wrong. The books promised excitement, but what they really delivered was endless laughter at the sheer unpredictability of turning the wrong page. Glowworms were one of the strangest yet funniest toys of the 1980s. On the surface, they were cuddly stuffed animals, but squeeze their soft bodies and the worm's head lit up with an eerie glow. Kids immediately turned them into jokes, calling them their nightlight pets, or pretending the glowing head was some kind of alien signal. Bedtime turned into a comedy routine as siblings laughed at the strange glow peeking out from under blankets. Commercials showed kids hugging their glowworms peacefully, but in real life, the toy was often used to scare friends in the dark. The glowing face made for perfect pranks, sneaking into a sibling's room and leaving the worm staring from the corner. Parents thought they were cute, but kids laughed at how odd it was to cuddle something that looked like a smiling flashlight. Today, glowworms are remembered less as bedtime comforts and more as quirky little comedians of the toy shelf. The Simon game brought a mix of concentration and comedy to every 1980s living room. The circular toy lit up in red, blue, green, and yellow, daring kids to repeat the pattern. At first, it seemed easy. Press the buttons in order, and the game rewarded you with a cheerful chime. But as the sequence got faster, mistakes piled up quickly. Someone would miss one color, the machine buzzed angrily, and the whole room erupted in laughter. Friends teased each other endlessly, chanting, "Wrong button!" while the loser covered their face in mock shame. The tension of waiting for your turn only made it funnier, especially when someone cracked under pressure and hit the wrong light. Siblings fought for bragging rights, but the real entertainment came from watching everyone fail in spectacular fashion. The game was part challenge, part comedy show, and it turned simple memory skills into a guaranteed laugh every single time. In the 1980s, no office or teacher's desk was complete without a Newton's Cradle. The little row of silver balls clicked back and forth endlessly, hypnotizing anyone who walked by. But for kids, it was pure comedy. They would sneak into offices or classrooms, pull the balls back way too far, and watch them clack like a miniature wrecking ball. Friends joked about how fancy it looked, as if swinging balls somehow made someone smarter. The sound was soothing at first, but quickly turned into a background rhythm that made everyone laugh when it interrupted serious conversations. Sometimes the strings tangled, leaving the balls hanging crookedly and spoiling the whole science effect, which only made it funnier. Even adults admitted it was less a scientific tool and more of a desk toy for showing off. Newton's Cradle may have been marketed as educational, but in reality it was just another 1980s gadget that gave people an excuse to laugh while pretending to be serious. Before streaming and 24-hour channels, television in the 1980s often shut down late at night. Instead of shows, the screen filled with colorful vertical bars and a high-pitched tone. Kids staying up too late laughed at the absurdity, calling it the midnight show. Friends dared each other to stay awake just to see the color bars, only to burst out laughing when that was all there was. Some even imitated announcers, making up silly programs starring the red bar or the blue bar. Parents rolled their eyes, reminding kids to go to bed, but the joke never lost its charm. The emptiness of the test pattern somehow became entertainment in itself. Looking back, it is funny to think that kids once laughed at nothing more than stripes on a screen. It was boring, strange, and ridiculous. But that was exactly why it became comedy for anyone awake past their bedtime. DIY haircuts at home were a gamble wrapped in a towel and held together by hope. The kitchen turned into a salon. A dining chair became the barber's throne. Mom or dad grabbed the dullest scissors in the drawer and told you to sit still. You did, kind of. And snip by snip, your identity changed. Bangs went crooked. Sideburns vanished. One side always ended up shorter. They tilted your head like that would help. You watched the clumps fall, hoping for the best. Sometimes it ended in tears, sometimes in laughs, but most often in silence and a baseball cap. You went to school the next day pretending nothing happened, but everyone knew. They always knew. DIY haircuts were not about style. They were about saving $20 and making it stretch. Hair grew back, groceries did not. So you endured the bowl cuts, the buzz jobs, the too short layers that stuck out like antennas. You got used to it. And after a while, it became normal. A family ritual, a budget tradition. Looking back, those crooked cuts carried more than just uneven lines. They carried effort, sacrifice, and a strange kind of love that you only see when the hair starts to grow in. Commercial jingles in the 1980s were not just background noise. They were the soundtrack of your childhood. Short, catchy, and borderline hypnotic. From "I do not want to grow up, I am a Toys R Us kid" to my buddy, wherever I go, he goes." These little songs became national earworms. You knew the tune before you even understood the product. And even now, decades later, you probably remember all the lyrics without trying. Fast food chains, toys, theme songs for cereal, they all knew how to brand themselves right into your brain. And we loved it. These were not just ads. They were pop culture. Kids would sing them on the playground like they were chart-topping hits. Some even had dance routines. And the best ones? They felt like a little burst of joy in between the shows you came to watch. It was marketing, sure, but it was also magic. A 30-second clip that made you beg your parents for action figures, Happy Meals, or the latest sugary snack with a weird mascot. And yes, even today, if you hear the opening note of gimme a break," you know exactly what is coming. But when it came to making your own mix of hits, that required serious patience and a strong dislike for chatty radio DJs. Once upon a time, you did not just decorate your bathroom, you committed to it. We are talking full-color, floor-to-ceiling, single-shade devotion. Pastel pink, mint green, baby blue, or the ever-famous avocado, these were the color-coordinated bathroom suites of the 1950s through the 1970s. And when we say coordinated, we mean everything. The toilet, the tub, the sink, the tile, sometimes even the toilet paper, matched like a showroom display. First Lady Mamie Eisenhower helped popularize the trend with what people dubbed Mamie Pink. Entire homes were built with these candy-colored palettes baked into their bones. But of course, color trends change. What once looked stylish and luxurious now feels a bit like stepping into a cartoon. As minimalism took hold in the 1990s and 2000s, bold bathroom hues were slowly wiped away, replaced by whites, grays, and beige. Still, those vivid bathroom suites had a kind of joy to them. They made you feel something, even if that something was confusion. And if the color did not impress you, the next home feature definitely would, especially if you ever hated carrying a heavy laundry basket down the stairs. The future did not arrive with a bang. It arrived in a beige plastic box that hummed quietly on a desk in the corner of your house. The Commodore 64, the Apple Macintosh. These were not just machines, they were portals into something entirely new. You typed, and the screen listened. You clicked, and doors opened. At first, it was simple. Word processors, floppy disks, a little green cursor blinking like it had a secret. But quickly, it became more. Games, learning, possibility. For kids, it was a playground. For parents, a tool. For dreamers, a revolution. It changed homework. It changed jobs. It changed you. That blinking cursor? It whispered that anything was possible. Families gathered around, just trying to figure it out together. The sound of a printer was like the future on paper. And the internet? Still a myth. Still a whisper. But you felt it coming. With every boot-up chime, every pixelated game, every painstaking keystroke, you were stepping into a new world. Personal computers did not just change technology. They changed lives. And for the first time ever, the future was not in a sci-fi movie. It was sitting on your desk. Boombox battles turned sidewalks into stages and backpacks into speaker cabinets. In the 1980s, carrying a massive boombox on your shoulder was more than a way to listen to music. It was a declaration. You had style, you had taste, and you had batteries heavy enough to power a small city block. These machines blasted everything from hip-hop to hair metal, and they did not ask for permission. You walked down the street with your soundtrack trailing behind you, volume all the way up, head nodding to the beat. Some kids parked them at basketball courts. Others lined them up outside corner stores. Whoever had the best bass usually won the crowd. Tapes were traded, dials were turned, and sometimes spontaneous dance-offs broke out right there on the pavement. Boomboxes were heavy, awkward, and impossible to ignore. But in a time before smartphones and Bluetooth, they were portable pride. They made noise. They made statements. And if you saw someone approach with a fresh cassette in hand and a boombox on their shoulder, you knew something good was about to happen. Boombox battles were not just about the music. They were about being seen, heard, and remembered. Reliance on government assistance programs was not a choice. It was the only way to get by. Food stamps came in paper booklets, torn out in the checkout line with quiet hands and sideways glances. School lunches were free, but they came with their own kind of price. Standing in a separate line, hearing the whispers, seeing the looks. You carried a different card, a different meal, a different kind of burden. The people behind the counter never said anything. But you knew. Everyone knew. At home, government cheese filled the fridge. Powdered milk sat on the shelf. The pantry was stocked with cans stamped from surplus stores, beans, peanut butter, cereal that tasted like cardboard but kept you full. Your parents made it stretch. They made it work. And they told you to hold your head up, even when you wished you could vanish. Because pride does not feed a family. Assistance was not shameful. It was survival. It was how your shoes fit, how your stomach was full, how you still made it to class with something in your bag. And though some days it felt heavy, it also meant someone, somewhere, knew you were worth helping. Even when the world made you forget. Public service announcements in the 1980s were something else. You would be watching cartoons or a sitcom, then suddenly, boom. The screen would cut to a gray filter, eerie music, and a serious voice saying, "This is your brain. This is your brain on drugs." Or a crash dummy flying through a windshield, or a puppet warning you not to talk to strangers. They were dramatic, unsettling, and weirdly unforgettable. One minute you were giggling at Garfield. The next you were wondering if touching a light socket would make you disappear forever. These announcements were designed to scare you straight. And they worked. They haunted your dreams and followed you into adulthood. Some used animation. Some used real actors with tear-streaked cheeks and slow zooms. And all of them felt like they were speaking directly to you. But even with the ominous tones, there was something strangely comforting about them. Like the world was trying to look out for you, even if it scared you a little. They were a strange part of growing up, and honestly, we would be lying if we said we did not remember them word for word. Still, if there was one thing that really balanced it all out, it was the glory of waking up at sunrise for the lineup of legends. Long before cell phones and even before cordless landlines, families had a different way of yelling through the walls. And no, it was not just yelling. We are talking about intercom systems. Installed in kitchens, bedrooms, garages, and hallways, these things were high-tech at the time. Built right into the wall, they had push buttons, tinny speakers, and a magical call button that could summon anyone from anywhere. It was like living inside your own hotel. "Dinner's ready!" would echo from speaker to speaker. You could check in on the baby, call the kids in from the yard, or talk to your spouse while still folding laundry. They even had a radio function in some fancier models, so you could blast the news or music in every room. These systems were sold as time savers, but they also showed off how cutting-edge your home was. Nothing said modern American household like a wall-mounted microphone next to your fridge. Eventually, of course, they wore out. The wiring went bad, or the kids used them to eavesdrop. And just like that, they fell out of style, replaced by text messages, smart speakers, and yelling again. But if you ever stayed at Grandma's house and heard your name echo through a crackly little box, you will never forget it. Now, how about something we used to build into the wall that flipped down like a magic trick? Get ready, because we are unfolding something special. They were not just dolls, they were your children, adopted, named, cared for like living, breathing extensions of your heart. Cabbage Patch Kids exploded into American homes like nothing else before them. Chubby cheeks, yarn hair, signed bottoms, they were adorable and slightly strange. But they were yours. No two were the same. That was the magic. It felt personal, like fate. Parents fought in department stores to get them. Shelves emptied in seconds. News clips showed grown adults wrestling over plush plastic babies. It was not just a toy. It was a phenomenon. And it swept through the country like a fever dream. Kids brought them everywhere, to school, to bed, to dinner. They came with birth certificates and backstories, turning playtime into family drama. In an age of make-believe, these dolls made things feel real. The craze might sound ridiculous today, but in the moment, it was everything. A doll you had to adopt? That was not just marketing, it was genius. It made you feel responsible, important, part of something. And when the madness faded, what was left was a memory of wide-eyed joy, pure affection, and a little friend who made childhood feel alive. Television antenna adjustments were part of the evening routine, just like brushing your teeth or fighting over the remote. Before streaming, before digital signals, there were rabbit ears, two shiny rods that stood on top of the television like alien feelers. Getting a clear picture meant twisting them in random directions, adjusting one while the other stayed stubbornly out of reach. Sometimes you needed to stand on one foot. Sometimes the only way to get the signal was to hold the antenna yourself and stay there, frozen, arm extended, human satellite. Someone from the couch would yell, "Right there, do not move," and you would stay stuck in position, sacrificing comfort for clarity. Foil was added for better reception. Coat hangers became tools of innovation. And if the weather was bad, good luck. The static would return like an uninvited guest. It was frustrating, yes, but it was also communal. Families worked together to solve the mystery of the fuzzy screen. You cheered when the picture came in. You groaned when it disappeared mid-show. Antenna adjustments were the dance of analog television. Awkward, unpredictable, and always a little magical when they actually worked. Homemade school lunches in washed-out containers were the unofficial lunchbox of every frugal family. Forget the cartoon thermos or the shiny metal lunch pail. If you were poor in the 1980s, your sandwich came wrapped in wax paper and packed in an empty margarine tub. Maybe the lid said Country Crock, but inside was leftover spaghetti or peanut butter crackers. You used the same container every day. The label peeled, the edges warped, but it worked. Your drink? Not a juice box. Maybe a reused jelly jar with watered-down Kool-Aid. You prayed it did not leak. In the lunchroom, you sat next to kids with perfectly packed snacks, cheese sticks, pudding cups, chips with real logos. You ate quietly, or fast, or not at all. But at home, it made sense. Those containers stacked neatly in the cupboard. Your parents washed them each night and packed them again with care. It was not about shame. It was about stretching every cent. And even though you knew it was different, you also knew it was made with effort, maybe even love. Those stained lids and handwritten notes stuffed under the sandwich were signs of sacrifice. And now, all grown up, they feel like something you miss. Blank VHS tapes were not just empty plastic boxes. They were treasure chests, the kind you could label, relabel, and fill up with your own little corner of television history. You remember the sound, right? That whirring click as the VCR accepted your latest recording project, whether it was The Muppet Show, a Disney movie airing on Saturday night, or just some random commercials you ended up watching later like they were rare artifacts. Back then, taping something off television was serious business. You had to time it perfectly. Hit record at just the right moment, or risk catching the tail end of a news anchor saying, "And now," before your show started. Fast-forwarding past commercials felt like a power move. Rewinding? An art form. And if you had one of those little tape rewinder machines shaped like a car, you were basically living in luxury. You wrote on those little white stickers with a level of care that rivaled school projects. Do not tape over. Disney only. Toys R Us ad. Keep forever. And when someone in the house recorded over your stuff with a football game, that was war. But if you wanted to really test your patience and your brain power, there was only one screen-based challenge that ruled them all. It was the original shortcut for busy kitchens, long before microwaves or DoorDash deliveries. Right there in the wall, usually between the kitchen and dining room, was a little opening known as a pass-through window. Not big enough to walk through. Just big enough to pass a steaming pot of mashed potatoes or a stack of plates. It was part convenience, part conversation starter, and part dinner-time drama stage. You could poke your head through and call out, "Who wants seconds?" Or you could slide a dish over without juggling it across the carpet. In bigger homes, they were framed out in wood or tile with little ledges to rest a casserole on. In smaller homes, they were purely functional, a hole in the wall that saved mom 10 steps at every meal. Some even had shutters or swinging doors, so you could close the kitchen once dinner was served. But eventually, open-concept living took over. People tore down the wall entirely instead of carving a window into it. And just like that, the pass-through became passé. Still, it had its charm. It turned dinner into a kind of performance. But if passing potatoes through a hole in the wall sounds odd, imagine burning your garbage in a machine tucked right next to the toilet. If the 80s had a personality, it was neon, loud, proud, and impossible to ignore. Color was not just a trend, it was a statement, and no one whispered. Leg warmers in hot pink, tracksuits in electric blue, eyeshadow that could stop traffic. The entire decade looked like it had been dipped in a highlighter and blasted with a disco ball. It was not about subtlety. It was about standing out. Walk into any mall, any gym, any music video, and it was a rainbow riot. But this was not chaos. It was confidence. Kids wore neon shoelaces. Adults rocked neon windbreakers. Even toys and commercials buzzed with that wild fluorescent glow. It was the decade where fashion turned into rebellion through brightness, because after the muted earth tones of the 70s, the 80s decided to scream. And we listened. We wore color like armor. We matched green earrings to orange belts without blinking. Fashion became a kind of freedom, to be seen, to be remembered, to be unapologetically alive. And yeah, sometimes it was ridiculous. But it was fun. It was electric. And most of all, it was a sign of the times, a wild, glowing, unforgettable beacon of 80s spirit. Neon everything was not a trend. It was a takeover. Shirts, socks, shoelaces, scrunchies. If it could be worn, it could be neon. Bright pinks, electric greens, yellows so vivid they could stop traffic. Walk into a classroom in the 1980s, and you might see a dozen students glowing like highlighters. It was not subtle, it was not sophisticated, but it was unforgettable. Neon made sure you were seen from across the street, or the roller rink. Entire outfits were built around one blinding shade. And the braver kids, they mixed them. A neon blue shirt with neon orange shorts and lime green shoelaces. Why not? Matching was optional. Visibility was everything. Neon told the world you were loud, proud, and unbothered by what anyone else thought. It showed up in birthday parties, aerobics tapes, and mall photo booths. Looking back now, it seems like a color explosion. But that was the magic. Neon was confidence in color form. It was youth, amplified. It was chaos, celebrated. And for those who wore it without a hint of irony, it was the brightest part of a decade that refused to dim. Furniture from thrift stores or curbside finds gave homes that mismatched charm only necessity could create. A sagging couch from someone else's garage sale. A wobbly coffee table rescued from the sidewalk. Chairs with mismatched legs or beds with slats that creaked under every turn. This was what made a living room feel lived in. There was no delivery truck, just a neighbor with a pickup, or a slow push down the block with a dolly borrowed from Uncle Joe. You sprayed it down, you wiped it twice, and you made it yours. Some pieces were covered in throws to hide the rips. Others leaned against the wall to stay upright. But they had character, stories, a past you never asked about. In kitchens, the table might have a burn mark or a dent from years of use, but it still held dinner. In bedrooms, dressers groaned when you pulled the drawers, but they closed eventually. New furniture was for people with money. For everyone else, you took what you could get, and you were thankful for it. Because when money was tight, having something, anything, to sit on was a win. You did not care how it looked. You cared that it worked. Speak and Spell. A name so simple, you almost forget just how advanced it felt. This little orange learning machine had a robotic voice that felt both comforting and unsettling at the same time. The keys were rubbery. The screen was a small LED display. And the second it powered on, you felt like a kid genius. This was not just a toy, it was a computer. At least to us it was. And for a lot of people, it was the first time they ever heard a machine talk to them like a teacher would. It would ask you to spell elephant or photograph in that slow, mechanical voice. If you got it wrong, it would buzz like you had just activated some kind of self-destruct sequence. And if you nailed it, that same robotic voice gave you praise like it meant something, like it knew you. Speak and Spell was part game, part lesson, and 100% magic. You did not need Wi-Fi. You did not need batteries half the time. All you needed was the imagination to believe that this talking toy was the smartest machine in the house. And sometimes, it probably was. Of course, intelligence was one thing, but style? That was another story. If you were the kid with this next item, everyone knew you had your life together. Heating only one room in winter was not just a strategy, it was survival. The whole house might be freezing, but one space stayed warm. Maybe it was the living room with a kerosene heater. Maybe the kitchen with the oven door cracked open. You brought in extra blankets. You wore your coat indoors. Everyone piled in, like penguins sharing body heat. You did homework at the coffee table, ate soup from mismatched bowls, slept on the couch or a pile of comforters laid out on the floor. The hallway felt like Antarctica. The bathroom? A short, icy sprint. At night, the cold crept into your bones, but during the day, you all huddled in that one room like it was the center of the universe. Parents told kids to keep the door shut. Do not let the heat out. No one dared argue. It was about bills, about making it to spring. And even though it felt unfair at the time, it also brought people close. Literally, you learned to share space, to pass the time, to be warm in more ways than one. Heating one room was not ideal, but it was home, and somehow it got you through. You had not lived until you beat the Oregon Trail without dying of dysentery. That was the holy grail of 1980s computer gaming. Those chunky gray computers in the school lab, that pixelated map, that relentless text box reminding you that little Timothy had broken a leg and your oxen just drowned crossing a river. Iconic. It was not just a game, it was survival. You learned real-life lessons in that pixel wilderness, like how much meat you could carry back from a hunt, not much, or why you should never try to ford a river without thinking it through. And somehow, we were totally into it. The green and black graphics, the clunky keyboard, the fact that it felt like schoolwork but kind of fun. You would all huddle around one screen, a group of 5 kids making group decisions like mini pioneers, and somehow it felt like the fate of your wagon family actually mattered. It was your first taste of choices in gaming, your first little moral dilemmas. Do you trade clothing for bullets? Do you rest for 2 days? Or do you push on and risk everyone freezing to death? Still, once the school bell rang, it was game over. And if you wanted to know what was playing in theaters that weekend, you did not Google it. You picked up the phone. Going to Pizza Hut in the 80s was not just about food. It was an event. The smell hit you before the door even closed behind you. Red checkered tablecloths, thick menus with pictures, glasses filled with cola and crushed ice, and in the corner, an arcade machine waiting to eat your quarters. It was magic. You sat in those big red booths with your family or your friends, flipping through laminated menus like you were at a fine dining joint. Pan pizza was the crown jewel, crispy, buttery, sizzling with cheese that stretched for miles. It was not about fast food, it was about the experience. You waited for your pie like it was a sacred ritual. The jukebox hummed in the background. Maybe your server wore a paper hat, maybe you got to read a comic book while waiting. Maybe you found a new favorite game. Pizza Hut was a memory factory, a warm, gooey, perfectly greasy escape from whatever was happening outside. And for a kid in the 80s, it was a kingdom. The pizza was hot, the games were bright, and the moments were golden. It was not just dinner, it was a slice of happiness. Leg warmers were a fashion miracle, pointless and perfect all at once. Originally designed for dancers to keep their muscles warm, they jumped out of the studio and into the mainstream thanks to aerobics videos and pop culture icons. Suddenly, everyone was wearing them, over tights, over jeans, even over bare legs. They came in neon, in stripes, in fluffy pastels. Some matched outfits, others clashed proudly. And they served no actual purpose unless you were stretching at a bar or leaping across a dance floor. But no one cared. Leg warmers made you feel like you were part of something glamorous and athletic, even if the closest you got to working out was lifting a hairbrush to lip sync in the mirror. Schools were filled with rows of students rocking scrunched-up fabric around their shins. Some slouched them just above the ankle. Others pulled them high like woolly socks from the future. They were soft, they were cozy, and they were everywhere. Looking back, they might seem silly, but they were fun, expressive, and totally 1980s. And for a few years, they made everyone feel like a star in their own low-budget dance movie. Using public transportation exclusively meant your life moved on someone else's schedule. There was no jumping in the car for milk, no last-minute rides. You waited. At bus stops, on corners, in the rain, in the cold, in your Sunday best or your work shoes. The bus was never early. Sometimes it was late. But you waited. You held a pocket full of exact change. Maybe a transfer stub. You knew the routes like the back of your hand. You sat near the front if you were tired. In the back if you did not want to talk. You watched strangers argue, laugh, cry. You saw your city from a different view, block by block, stop by stop. Owning a car seemed like another world. Gas, insurance, repairs. Those were luxuries. The bus was what you had. And it was enough. Sort of. It got you to school, to work, to church. You learned to carry groceries in bags that would not break. You made friends with the drivers. You memorized delays. And when the ride was over, you stepped off into whatever came next. Public transportation did not just move you. It taught you patience, resilience, and how to hold on when the brakes hit hard. Stirrup pants were the 1980s attempt to combine fashion with function, and they did neither particularly well. These leggings had a strap that looped under your foot, supposedly to keep them from riding up. In reality, they pulled awkwardly at your ankles, made your feet sweat, and caused socks to bunch in weird places. But we wore them anyway. They came in bright colors, bold patterns, and every synthetic material known to mankind. They were stretchy, shiny, and often paired with oversized sweaters or blazers that made no logical sense. From the knees up, you looked like a school principal. From the knees down, you looked like a gymnast caught mid-warm-up. But stirrup pants had their moment. They were the go-to outfit for school picture day, mall trips, or just feeling like you belonged in a fashion catalog. The loop under the foot made you feel oddly secure, like your pants were holding onto you. Sure, they sagged in weird places. Sure, they made your calves look like sausages. But they were a staple, loved, mocked, and deeply missed. For anyone who wore them, stirrup pants were more than a fashion choice. They were a commitment, a stretch of spandex, and a rite of passage. The 1980s gave us laughter we still feel today, so share your funniest memory in the comments, give this video a like if it made you smile, and hit subscribe so we can keep reliving the moments that made growing up unforgettable.